All right, guys, we are going to do a little bit of a bonus video this time for the 2002 Ford Expedition in this series, where we've got a weird situation where we just cannot read long-term fuel trim on this car, no matter what we do. And it did seem that it had a vacuum leak. Well, it did have a vacuum leak. We saw that with the smoke machine. There was actually a really significant vacuum leak at the EGR valve, where it bolts up to the intake manifold, so that is going to be a vacuum leak, and confirmed that with the smoke test. But throughout all of the diagnosis, we were never able to see a long-term fuel trim. We also have some funky dashboard lights going on, and we were thinking, man, we've got some weird, either some weird communication thing or some odd fault that the vehicle does not seem to have a long-term fuel trim. Initially, we thought it wasn't calculating long-term trim, but it does appear after further experimentation in the video part 2 that we are not getting reporting of the fuel trim. So I actually went on a business trip for the last several days and had a lot of time on the airplane, and I was thinking about it and also rewatched the video and came up with some ideas on what the situation is and how we can get that long-term trim to report. So also a lot of your comments also agreed the long-term trim clearly is there. And we'll talk about how we know that if you're not following along. But the long-term trim is there, just doesn't seem to be reporting. And of course, you know, other people, and there is the possibility that we've got some kind of computer issue or telecommunications issue or something. But whatever the case is, I did rewatch the video. I had a lot of time to think about it on the flight out to California, and I put together some things that we missed in the previous video that I think are going to help us to solve this mystery. One of the things I also wanted to do real quick was address one of the comments, and that was, what does it matter? You found the EGR leak, so what does it matter pursuing this? Well, the reason it matters is, first of all, for educational purposes. This is something where if this happens again, and maybe it's not a vacuum leak that I can easily find with a smoke machine, well, how am I going to find whether the car is even running rich or lean unless I have my long term, right? So I need to understand what happened in that regard to prevent this from being an obstacle in the future. But also I need it for the confirmation on the repair. Basically, the guy left the car with me the whole time I was in California because I told him I just wasn't really sure about this computer thing. He wants the car returned to him right. And my guess is that's because he doesn't want to ride his bike back home again, I suppose. But he wants the car done right. He doesn't need the car immediately. He's got a bunch of other cars. So he just left the car with me in the garage while I was in California. So it's still sitting right here behind me. And the thing is that I don't want to return the car to him unless I know for sure he's not going to get a check engine light come on later or something like that. So I want to make sure I return it to him right. Well, to do that, I have to see that the long-term fuel trim is around 0, right? So I can't do that because it only ever reads 0 and it is not 0. So I don't know that the EGR valve repair is going to guarantee that I'm not going to get a comeback unless I see confirmation of the repair. So that's why it's important. So what I want to do is, like with anything else, when you're filming, and also I'm kind of worried about making sure I make it to the airport on time and finish the video and all this and that, you kind of lose track of your methodology sometimes, and basically we're going to get back on track with it by doing what we always do, and that is setting up differential diagnosis. And we are going to see that there is really one explanation, just one explanation for what happened with this car not showing fuel trim, and I think we're going to be able to resolve it. So if we look at it logically, there are 4 possible explanations for what we saw in parts 1 and 2 of this series. One of them is, of course, the LTFT is 0.00 all the time. And that we are going to absolutely eliminate. That is not even a possibility. It's because we were driving the vehicle with the vacuum leak. Remember, we were driving around before I found that leak at the EGR valve. So we should have had the long-term reading high. It's certainly above 0. So we know just from the smoke test, there is no way this car has a long-term trim of perfect 0.00. So we're going to eliminate that. Would be that the long-term fuel trim is not being calculated. So there is some kind of error in the software or with the computer that long-term fuel trim is never being established in the first place. So we don't have any long-term fuel trim. We know that that's not true either. So we're going to eliminate that. And we are not going to do any pursuit of anything that would be in that direction, so we save time and stay focused. How do we know that the long-term fuel trim is being calculated? The reason is because we set up several experiments in part 2 where we changed conditions for the engine, either rich or lean, and we watched the short-term fuel trim respond, but then zero itself out. That only would happen if the long-term fuel trim was being calculated and established a new baseline. So we know that there is long-term fuel trim on this vehicle. If there was not, the short-term trims would be staying at a really negative state or a really positive state because there would be nothing to set them at a 0 point again. There would be no new baseline unless long-term is being set. We know that is not happening. We are eliminating that as a variable. So that leads to the third variable, and that would be that the long-term fuel trim obviously is being calculated, but it is not being reported. So the scan tool is not able to detect the long-term trim because the PCM is not sending it. Now that is a possibility, but I don't think it's as likely as the fourth possibility, which is similar. Just to clarify again, this is not saying that it's not being calculated. There's a difference. We are saying it is being calculated, but for whatever reason, the car's PCM is not outputting that data that can be detected by the scan tool. It's just keeping it internal, but it is being calculated. So that's what I mean by not being reported. The biggest problem with this is that every other PID is being reported, every other one. So I think we're more likely to see this final possibility as what is the real cause. And that's going to be the long-term fuel trim somehow has a communication error with the scan tool. It's there, it's being reported, none of my scan tools can detect because there is some communication error. That is what this problem is going to be. And here's why I know it's going to be that versus the LTFT not being reported. Although I'm not ruling this out because this is still a possibility. I cannot rule this out because we don't have any evidence against it. The thing is, we also don't have any evidence for this. I cannot create any condition where I can get any other PID not to report. So I don't have evidence for or against this. The difference is in rewatching the video, I have evidence for this. Because, as I'm going to show you in a minute when we look at some footage from the previous video, we're going to see that we can get various communication effects with different settings from the scan tool, particularly the model year. So because of that, you got to remember that your car's PCM is just outputting data. So when you tap into that with your scan tool is just tapping into that. Yes, there can sometimes be bidirectional communication between the scan tool and PCM, but the PCM, for all practical purposes, doesn't even know your scan tool is there. It's just outputting data, and your scan tool is just reading it. Different settings on your scan tool can affect how you can read, or if you can at all read the data coming from the PCM. But nothing that you do here is going to change what the PCM outputs. The PCM outputs the same thing all the time. You just have different listeners on the other end, and they may speak a little bit different languages, and they can interpret things a little bit differently. That's what your scan tool is. And that's why we're going to find this is a communication issue. Let me show you the evidence of it on the video. Okay, if we look at part 1 of the video, when I set up my Auto Ingenuity, if you remember, I had thought that I made a mistake, and it turns out I did make one, and that is for whatever reason, I don't know. I entered the car in as a 2004 Ford Expedition, not a 2002 Ford Expedition, which is the correct model year. And if you look in the lower corner here, you won't be able to see it on your guys' screen, but you can see it says Ford Expedition 2004. Auto Ingenuity tells you the model, make, and year that you've set or that it auto connected to. So I did enter the wrong vehicle year. And typically when that happens, yeah, you can get some weird things happen. Typically, you can't respond to all the modules is usually what it is. But I've never seen it, I'll admit, where you can't communicate with just one PID. That, I will admit, is a weakness in my theory here. Okay, now as I move along here, you'll see that we get our short-term trims and long-term trims coming up. Long-term trims, you'll see they don't read 0.00, they read 0.01, which I didn't really think anything at the time, but it turns out this is going to be significant. You can see also the short-term trims are showing in hundredths as normal. They're showing in decimal points. So this again is with the incorrect model year. All right, now later on when I catch this mistake and we move forward, I go ahead and I enter 2002 for the model year, and watch how different the numbers look. Okay, so here we've got short terms set up here and here. Look how they're just perfect round whole integers. And then we're going to pull up the long term here. And we can see that the long term's reading 0.00. There's no hundredths. Like I mentioned earlier, this isn't a change in what is being sent by the PCM. This is a change in what the scan tool is interpreting, and it's only interpreting whole numbers. And that is with the correct model year. Obviously, it is a little concerning that you enter the correct model year and you get what is clearly not as accurate data. All right, so I think looking at that sort of changes things, and we missed that before. I was bothered by seeing those whole integers like that, but I didn't really think about it because I was just more concerned about not having any reporting on the fuel trim. But now I see that this is going to be a communication error. So obviously, what would cause this? Well, as some people pointed out in the comments very astutely, it is likely that the engine has been replaced or something. Remember, I even mentioned just in passing that it appeared to me that the engine had some kind of major work done before I got there, possibly even a replacement. It turns out, I did talk with the owner, and he said that 3 years ago the engine was rebuilt. So he's got a rebuilt engine in there. That is all that I know. I don't know if that came with a new PCM or what, but you know, I'm assuming it was rebuilt as opposed to replaced with a different model year. But as people pointed out in the comments, like I was saying, a model year change with the PCM or the engine would be a really good explanation for this. Again, the only problem is when you enter the wrong model year, usually one of two things happens. You either don't get communication with all the modules, or you can't communicate at all. Even if we find this is the issue, that will be the first time I have ever seen where entering the incorrect model year only seems to affect one PID. Off camera, I did select a whole bunch of other PIDs and was not able to find any that didn't appear to be reading correctly. So anyway, that has to be it. So we are going to go in this direction. Obviously, what I am going to do is hook up my scan tool, and we are going to walk through the model years for the expedition until we find the one that gives us the correct reading. So let's get on it. All right, don't worry, I am not going to walk you through every model year until we figure this out. But what I do want to do is at least reproduce what we saw in the video there, and then pretty much off camera I will walk through, oops, it's not Aerostar Expedition. Off camera I will walk through and find the correct model year that gives us our information. So right now we are doing 2004. This, of course, is the incorrect model year. The only reason I'm doing this is to reproduce what we saw in the first video, just to make sure. So there's our long-term fuel trims, bank 1 and 2. You see again reproducing, we're fixed at 0.01. It does kind of change a little bit to 0. Didn't really notice that before, but the main thing is when I pull up these short terms, you see that we read what looks to be proper short-term data, reading to the hundredths, but no long-term. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip over to 2002. Should be the correct model year according to the VIN number. All right, so now look at our long terms fixed completely at 0, but look at our short terms. We have round integers instead of the decimals reporting now. So again, just difference in the model year can absolutely show some differences in your data. What you won't see though is where you can only get one PID that doesn't work. So I still am a little worried about that, I will agree. But yeah, every PID that I've tried has worked just fine. But this is evidence that different settings on the scan tool can affect what you see on your screen there. So what I'm going to do now is let's just take a guess. I'm going to go back to a different system. We're going to go to 2001. Oh, and I remembered one other thing too, and that was we saw different, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up the DTCs. We saw different DTC patterns prior. Oh, and check it out right there. Look, the airbag. Remember the airbag light was on? Previously, we didn't have any airbag code. Well, what was happening is we weren't able to read the airbag module. Now, with this set at 2001, we can read the airbag module, and we see there is a legitimate driver's side airbag circuit short to ground. Hey, that would be a good video for the pay channel. We'll have to see if we can do that. We will definitely have to look at that. But yeah, the airbag is not some crazy network issue where there isn't a code but the light is on. That's a legitimate code. So hopefully that means we'll now be able to see our long and short term fuel trims. Now, that's not a good sign there. Our short terms are again whole integers. Where's long term? And yeah, we're not reading long term again. Fixed at 0. So what I'm going to do is I am going to go off camera and I'm going to basically walk through the model years until I get this to work. So I will be back. All right, guys, I will admit I'm getting a little bit desperate here now, but we can see that I'm using a different code reader now because I went through every year with my Auto Ingenuity and was not able to detect long term. Trying a totally different scan tool here. This is just a little launch C reader 8011, really, really basic read-only scan tool, and you can see that it also does not pick up the long terms at all. It does pick up the short terms just fine. So I'm going to do one last thing. I'm going to try using my CRP Touch Pro, and if that doesn't do it, then I don't know what to say. We just simply, maybe the long terms aren't being reported. There is one thing I do want to do on this, though. One thing I like about this tool it's going to show which network module it connects to. So when I click here, we can see it should be J1850, and it is. Okay, so it recognizes J1850. What I'm wondering, remember I saw there were some other network pins when we were looking at the network signal, and I wonder if it's possible some PIDs are reported through a CAN or another network maybe, and we're just not seeing it through the scan tool because it's not on the 1850. I wonder if that's possible, because like I said, I was surprised there were some other pins available for other networks, but strike that. I didn't see any signal on those pins. It didn't appear there was any network signal on them, so I do believe it is just 1850. That would have been an explanation, though, if I saw signal on those. And there was none. There's pins there, but I think they're just not active. All right, let me go ahead and grab my CRP Touch Pro. So one thing I like about this tool is when I am working on cars where I typically have communication problems with my other scan tools, this one does seem to do a better job of communicating. That would be like with Audi and BMW and some of the cars like that, the Europeans, where I typically have communication trouble. Let's see if it'll automatically find this. What my hope is that since I tend to have better communication with this scan tool, maybe it will be able to read what the others can't. Well, I'm afraid to choose the model year. We'll go ahead and we'll do the correct one. It'll be a 2002. PCM. I really like this scan tool, and I do want to thank my friends at Launch for sending me this. Yes, they did let me keep it, but you would be amazed the amount of stuff that I have been given that I do not review because I just don't want to be a review tool whore like that. But this tool is really awesome. I do like it. I will really like it if it reads a long-term fuel trim. I will love it. No bidirectionality on this tool, it's read-only, but I just love the interface. And all right, let's see. All right, there's long-term 1. Long-term 2 will, of course, bring short-term 1. Where's short-term 2? Right there. All right. See if it reads it. It does not. It does not. All right. I have had enough. I don't know, man. I got nothing, man. I got nothing. Off camera, I went through and I walked through model years. Also, of course, used every tool in generic mode, just getting generic OBD2, and every single time I am unable to read the long-term fuel trim on there. I mean, I've got nothing. I still believe it's a communication problem, but we don't know whether it's not being reported. I just know it's there, but I cannot read it, so for all I know, the truck is running extremely rich right now. I have no way of knowing. I know that it's in stoichiometry because of the short terms, but there is nothing showing no matter what I do. So, you know what? Part of me also, I know that Scanner Danner had told us that you've got to drive the car in order to get the long terms to show up. I may go ahead and set it to a different year or something and try driving the car and seeing if I can get them to report then. But I don't see that that's going to happen. But I will do that if I find that I can get it to happen after driving. Then then I'll come back. But we'll put a note at the end of this on how that turned out. So If you guys got any ideas, I am all for it, or if you've seen this before, and especially if you've seen it before and you figured it out. But I cannot get anything to show that long-term trim, and I am absolutely convinced it is a communication problem. I just don't have any way of getting around it. So, yeah, that is it for this video. Hope you found it entertaining. Sorry it didn't work out the way I had hoped, but we'll see you next time, and at some point, I'm going to figure this thing out. We'll talk to you later.